Welcome back. Let's talk about cloud computing and why is it so transformative as your internet browser or your smartphone app store. Now, all these transformative technologies have something in common. They were all user interface moment when they were introduced to the world for the first time. Let me explain. Prior to internet, there was something called ARPANET. Now, ARPANET allowed point-to-point connections to large mainframe systems. It was very complicated to get onto the ARPANET and look up information. Then came a company called Netscape, which completely changed the game. They created the browser, the very first browser, which allowed an average user to get onto the internet and look up information. In fact, the browser evolved into a platform in itself and really democratized the entire internet for everyone. It became much easier for just about anyone to get onto the internet and look up information. So this browser was that user interface moment which completely changed the game. So when I say user interface moment, what I really mean is something which really transforms a very complicated thing to a very simple thing where it democratizes it and allows anyone to come and use it. Similar thing happened with the smartphone app store. If you think about it, prior to the app store, it was very difficult for a developer to get their applications onto the hands of the consumer. In fact, after the app store, it became much easier for any developer anywhere in the world who could write an application and almost instantly distribute it to any consumer in the world. It was really very transformative. So in that sense, the App Store itself was a user interface moment again, which was very, very transformative, just like the internet browser. Now, cloud computing is also very similar. Prior to cloud computing, it was very complicated to procure compute resources, install and configure them before you could run your workloads. But cloud computing made it possible to provision almost any compute resource you need all through one interface. So in that sense, cloud computing is also that user interface moment which proved out to be very transformative, just like your internet browser or your smartphone app store. Cloud computing is a pay-as-you-go model. So you really don't have to buy any compute resources upfront to run your workload. In fact, these cloud companies are more like a utility company providing you these computing resources just like a utility company would provide you electricity. If you're a startup, this is a very big advantage because you can get started without having to spend a whole lot of money upfront. Prior to this model, the startup founders had to go and get some investment before they could get started. But today, most founders are like really getting started on the cloud, almost on their own credit card. And of course, when the traction happens, then they go and look for investment, which again is less risk for the investor because they can really see the traction before they invest. The other big advantage of the cloud is scaling up and down as and when needed. And this is huge because it liberates you from being over-provisioned or under-provisioned if you were to own everything in-house, right? So it's kind of like similar to electricity where you can draw more and less as and when needed. In the big data world that we are in today, this is a big advantage because you may need a lot of compute processing from time to time to build your models, but not all the time. So in the cloud, since you can scale up and down as and when needed, you can run really lean with your compute resources. Now, if you're a startup, this advantage brings you at par with large companies. Why? Because think about it. In the pre-cloud days, if you had to process terabyte or petabyte or exabyte of data, you had to buy all of that compute resources, bring it all in-house, and then be able to process that data. But today, you can just get onto the cloud and be able to process all of that data without really buying all the compute resources upfront. In fact, this is the reason why you see a whole lot of companies, a whole lot of startups in the financial sector space. It's all called fintech, which are competing against large traditional financial firms. Also, cloud gives you the agility that you need in a fast-changing world. In the traditional model, where you own all of the compute resources in-house, you can't just throw away the old and bring in the new as soon as the new appears. Because generally you depreciate your asset before you replace it with new. But in the cloud, since you don't own these resources, you can replace these resources anytime a new thing appears, which means you can embrace new technologies as soon as it shows up. There's also a speed advantage as cloud converts infrastructure to code. In fact, you provision infrastructure in the cloud via code. So operations become more like a development work. Once operations becomes code, then you can bring in all the engineering disciplines of development into operations work. You can track changes and do source control. In fact, you could also build up and tear down infrastructure anytime as required for development, testing, staging, etc. Finally, going global is much easier in the cloud. These cloud companies have already established their data centers and standardized them in different regions across the world. So when you have to move to a specific market in a different country, all you have to do is choose the region of that cloud provider in that country and copy your offerings there and then localize it for that market. Come learn more about emerging technologies at Uptinker. Reach out to us using the link below, and thank you for watching.